introduction, and I appreciate very much your inviting me to be here today. So I'm happy to see you all. I'm looking at Patty right now. I don't have everybody else on here. I guess I can do that. But as Patty said, I've been teaching this class for, I think, 4 or 5 years. I did start with OLLI with an obituary class. It was kind of trends in obituaries, and it was really a very upbeat class, but it was never overwhelmingly attended just because of the topic, I think. And one of my students several years ago said, why don't you teach a memoir class? And I thought, well, my gosh, I've never even thought about teaching a memoir class. I wouldn't have any idea how to go about it. But after talking to the Emory, to the OLLI administrators, I decided to give it a shot, and I did it during a summer session. And I started with, I think, maybe 40 or 50 questions broken down into a month-long class. And it has now grown, as Patty said, to 250 prompts that I just gather. They just pop up every day. I just saw some new ones that I'm going to do coming up. And so I've just have continued to do it. And I'm delighted that Patty has been there for 2 years. And she really, I think, started it. Wasn't it about the time you retired, Patty?
Yes.
You became a professor emeriti. And she has really been a very insightful soul to this class. The personalities are so diverse. Some people just write only funny, clever things. Some people are lean more to the dark things. I have one person that does a lot of things on Excel spreadsheets. That's her way of telling a story. But it is basically a month-long class each session, and we meet for an hour and a half a week. And the class is really an opportunity for people to leave stories for their children, grandchildren, families that they wish they had from their parents and grandparents. I have a quote from the writer William Zinsser, that I found in a Atlantic magazine several years ago, and he says, "One of the saddest sentences I know is, I wish I had asked my mother about that, or my father, or my grandmother, or my grandfather. And who amongst us does not wish that we could roll back the clock and either pay more attention to the stories that they did tell us, or ask us about the stories they might have been reluctant to tell us, or ask us about the stories that might have related to what we were going through, whether it was, love stories or work stories or relationship stories or house buying stories. There are stories everywhere. And I think many of us do wish that we had some of those stories from the people we grew up with. And it's a natural thing to want to leave the stories now for those who are coming up behind us. So I am going to try with these tricks that I learned yesterday on the sharing. I'm going to share some slides with you all about the Memoir Kit. And why a memoir class? I think that when people think about wanting to leave their life stories, they think they have to begin with, I was born on, and my parents were, and my siblings are, and I went to school here, and then I had these jobs and this marriage and these children or whatever. But in this class, we're just not starting that way, but it is an opportunity to say, who were you before these people, these children and grandchildren knew you? And who are you now? And how have you changed? How have you grown? How have you evolved? Where have you been all these years? And what have you done? When I issue the prompts to the students, it allows them to pick and choose what stories they want to tell. You do not have to tell every single thing about yourself just because you want to write a memoir. That's kind of how a memoir differs from biography and autobiography. These are your memories. They don't have to be every single absolute fact about you. So you can pick and choose what you want to say. When I ask the questions through these prompts, it allows the writers to actually focus on one story and stay focused. And I encourage them to write the question at the top of their page so that they can always look at it and remind themselves, this is the very specific story that I am trying to tell in this piece. The prompts also help them dig up a memory. I can't tell you how many times I have had students write about something and they've said, I never even thought about this story or realized it was a memory until you asked that question in that particular way. And I do try to ask the questions in a way that is not just, did you have a nickname? But how about, did you have a nickname? How did you get it? How did you feel about it? Do you still have it? So they elaborate a little bit on this. Who were you named for? Were you named for somebody? Who was that? Did you have a relationship with that person? Was it somebody you admired? Were they engaged with you? Or was it somebody you never knew? We've had plenty of stories of people who were named after celebrities, and that's what their parents wanted to do. So that's why a memoir kit. And there are two quotes that I have that guide the way this class rolls out. The first one is from Jean-Luc Godard, the French-Swiss film director. I've had trouble with that all week. And he said, a story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. And I love this because it kind of validates the way we go about this class. We just jump in with prompts, different prompts every week. They started out being in chronological order, but as people kept coming back to the class, I had to create new prompts and move forward in different ways. So all of these stories that they've written, they could be put in chronological order if somebody did actually want to put them together in a memoir, or they can just be willy-nilly. Here are some great stories from my life. Here are some sad stories from my life. They could be arranged by family stories or by travel stories or by relationship stories, but they do not have to be in any particular order. The other quote that I love is from Flannery O'Connor. Anyone who has survived childhood has enough material to write for the rest of her life. I absolutely love that. And interestingly, I was reading a book review in the New York Times over the weekend. I think it was The Horror of New York. I don't know if anybody saw that review, but the book reviewer said, as with most memoirs, the childhood section of the book is the least interesting. I could not find that further from the truth in the stories that are elicited about childhood in these classes. Whether they're very whimsical stories, did you have any eating quirks when you were young, or what they could be darker stories. Did you lose somebody close to you when you were young? How was that explained to you? What was the impact of that? So those two quotes really guide the way this class goes. And I want to just, I think I said earlier, the class meets once a week, hour and a half. There are over 250 prompts. We started out with a word count of 600 words, which probably sounds like a drop in the bucket to many of you academic people, because I know the writing tends to certainly be longer form than that. And they thought that 600 words was never enough to tell a story. And then one of the students said, what if we try writing shorter? Wow, whoever wanted to write shorter? Mark Twain said, I don't have enough time to write shorter. So we now have a maximum word limit of 400 words. And that's really one of the few deadlines in the class, 400 words. And sometimes there'll be, I'll offer several prompts and say, this one's 75 words, this one's 150, this one's 200, this one's 250, but never more than 400 in this day and age. And that's one of the only few rules. And then the other one is, of course, deadline. And I try to have them get their stories to me on Monday evening. We have our class on Wednesday at 2. But I do like to read them all beforehand, and I like to do a little light editing if they're open to that. And most of the time they are. In fact, I got a note from somebody this morning saying, thank you so much for making me take those sentences out of the story. That doesn't often happen, but I often find that if I'm reading the story, I might find a gap or a hole in the story or something, a thought that's not completed or something that strays from what the focus of it is supposed to be. So I do try to just do those few rules. And the way it works is they get the prompt, they write the story, then they come back the next week and read the story to the class. And in the beginning, there were several students who were reluctant to read their story in front of the class. They thought it was very personal, and sometimes it was too emotional. And they just, one woman in particular came to class every time, but did not ever share her stories. She has continued to come to classes and now does share her stories. And it is very rare, really, that anyone has declined to read their stories at all. And sometimes if it's too emotional, they'll ask me if I will read it for them, which of course I'm happy to do. And many times we all get pretty emotional about some of these stories. As Patty said, there are abuse, abandonment, alcoholism, death, divorce. They are just life stories is what they are. So I'd like to go back to a screen and share with you I'm going to give you some examples of prompts from each of the chapters that Patty mentioned. And if any of you want to take a picture of the screens, it's okay to do that. I'm not allowed to issue all the prompts to anybody at this point while it's under the copyright process. But if you think that you might want to get a little bit of a head start on this and take pictures of these screens, please feel free. All right, so we are, I just wanted to start with this slide in the beginning, and some of these pictures are for the class coming up this coming week. One of the writers last week wrote a piece about her two grandmothers, kind of contrasting them a little bit and talking about what she had learned from them. So I created a prompt from that and asked for this week, anybody who wanted to write about grandmothers to send pictures and write about them and what they had learned from them and what the impact had been on them. So the pictures of women in this slide are all grandmothers. One of the most interesting, I think, is the woman down at the bottom with the blue sweater. The writer was writing about her grandmother, who she did not meet until the grandmother's 100th birthday on Zoom, because her father, the writer's father, this was the writer's father's mother, and he had been 19 when he had a relationship with somebody 10 years older who was a teacher, not his teacher, but a teacher. And the woman, the writer, was given up for adoption, and she never knew who her father was, who her mother was, but she did reconnect with her father and met this woman in the blue sweater on her 100th birthday. And she's written a very poignant story about that. The picture of Jax is just something that's come up in childhood stories. The bottle of mercurochrome, I often ask if there's a taste or smell from childhood that someone recalls either lovingly or frighteningly or just nostalgically. And mercurochrome was something that had come up. I think Patty had written about watching her mother put Noxzema on her face as a nightly ritual. And then the picture of the furniture just struck a chord with me because the writer was writing about a set of Naugahyde furniture that her parents had bought in the 1960s, and it brought back memories, excuse me, to me, of the also green, squeaky Naugahyde furniture we had in our house growing up in Atlanta. That just kind of tickled me. So the chapter on growing up and out, teenage years and college. Here are a couple of examples. What do you remember about sitting at your kitchen table growing up? What took place there? What kind of food, table settings, manners, topics of conversation? Were there any rules? Or what do you remember about your first date, your first crush, first date, first kiss, or first love? Who were the targets? And did any of these relationships turn into anything lasting? So far, I haven't heard that any of them turned into anything lasting, but there have been really fun stories about each of these, and also the follow-up, which nowadays you are able to Google to find out what happened to some of these people who were your firsts. Young adulthood in the 20s, early goals and events. Were there causes, charities, or campaigns you were particularly passionate about and involved with? How and why did you become engaged? And what was your level of involvement? This house on the right does not necessarily go with that picture, with that prompt, but it is the cottage on the Callenwold campus that one of the writers and her husband had lived in with their dog in the early days of their marriage, and kind of acted as not really caretakers, but they were just on site to watch over things. And it's just such a charming little cottage, and she wrote a charming story about that. What was the riskiest or most adventurous thing you did during this time? Did you get in trouble, and were you punished? Relationships. The relationships chapter is not just restricted to relationships, not romantic relationships, not necessarily family relationships, but it could be any relationship. A stranger, a family member, a boss, a friend, a celebrity, a pet, any kind of relationship whatsoever. If you had a spouse or partner, what kind of relationship did you have with your in-laws? How did they enhance or complicate your life? How about a relationship with a special pet? What was it and what did it mean to you? One of the interesting relationship prompts that had come up not too long ago was, there's another quote that I like that someone told me years ago: people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I offered that as a prompt and asked each writer to write about someone who had come in for a season, someone who had come in for a reason, and someone who had come in for a lifetime. Those were very interesting stories. Jobs, careers, lessons learned, triumphs, and flops. Did your career dovetail with an activity or hobby you loved as a child? Can you connect that childhood experience with your life's work? That is actually a picture of me that I had shared with the class several months ago. I was a young reporter at Newsday on Long Island covering a kidnapping, and we had a 24-hour stakeout at the house where the child was kidnapped. I love the walkie-talkie that we had. Those were the tools that we used, but it definitely did harken back to my childhood when I just was investigating everything, curious about everything, asking questions of everyone, everything, and just so interested in what was going on around me and people's lives, what makes everybody tick. So that is how my childhood connected with my careers. And I think that very often happens. If you go back to think about what you really loved to do as a child, did that manifest itself in what you ended up doing with your work? The chapter on influences: parents, colleagues, bosses, books, movies, world events, faith, etc. Is there something in nature that draws you back over and over, that thrills you to experience? There's a woman who takes pictures of sunsets everywhere she goes, sunrises rather, everywhere she goes, all over the world. She's got an amazing collection of her sunrises. Was there a historical event, election, war, natural catastrophe that profoundly moved you and or changed your life or the direction of where you were headed? And one of a good question that we get a lot from is, what role has music played in your life? And these pictures were submitted by a writer who had gone to the Beatles concert here in Atlanta when they were at the stadium, and a random collection of her records. And it's just been a huge passion of her life. And she made a very good story out of that. This is So You. The prompts in this chapter are the kinds of things that people would say, oh, Mom, you always say that, or I knew you'd buy that coat, or I knew you'd drive that kind of car, or I knew you would take that kind of trip. trip, it's just so you. You always do that. You always order fried chicken or whatever, just the so you kinds of things. What are your favorite quotes or mantras to live by? And why? Where did they come from? And what impact do they have on the way you live? I think we all have things we've collected and saved and things that have spoken to us over the years. I have so many of them that I've saved that I've actually published 3 little books of quotes about life and aging, and I just continue to collect them. Do you have a party trick you like to do for a crowd? There was a woman in class a couple of years ago who was just the epitome of a Southern, just a Southern lady. She always came to class when we were meeting in person, perfectly coiffed, perfectly dressed, very quiet, soft-spoken, but she had a great sense of humor, and she wrote about going to a cocktail party. I believe it was at her husband's boss's house, and someone came up to her and said, I heard that you know how to do a split. And she handed her drink to her husband and immediately dropped down into a full split on the floor in front of mostly people she didn't know. And the whole class was just in hysterics about that because it was so unsurprising from her. It was so surprising from her. So here's the chapter called Really Wow. These are things about you that might surprise people, even people who think they know you well, people who've known you forever. You undoubtedly have something that you've done or thought or said or been that they might not know. What is the most adventurous thing you've done? This was a picture of a woman who went skydiving. I can't remember whether it was for her birthday, but there she is in tandem, having jumped out of the plane. Write about the time you walked through fire, your life's hardest moment, and how you came out of that experience intact. How did it change you? Had one person who wrote about walking out of a marriage on Christmas Day from an alcoholic, and another story from a woman who wrote a fabulous story about actually walking on coals. That was an amazing story. Have you ever experienced what you consider to be a real miracle, a true miracle? Then there's a chapter on looking back, assessing your adulthood. How does it all look in the rearview mirror? When you consider your lifetime and looking back at different decades, different periods, different episodes, how does that look to you? Is there a time or event in your life that thrills you to think about, or maybe one that continues to haunt you? And were you ever given a gift you consider transformative? That question actually came from something I was looking back. I don't remember exactly how this got started. Someone asked me about how I got interested in going to the theater, I think. And I remember the Christmas after my mother died, I was 21. My father gave me season tickets to the High Museum. I'm not sure that was called the High Museum at that point, but it was the Woodruff Arts Center. And that just got me so interested in theater and in art. And it was just an amazingly creative gift for him to have given me that has had a lifelong impact. And I'm forever grateful for that. And I'm sure there are many examples of things similar. Looking ahead, I say keep your eyes on the road and keep moving. We still have memories to create. We still have memoir items to add to our collections. And it's just not over. We just have to keep going. So I like to ask if people think about their legacy and how they would like to be remembered. This is kind of a play off of the obituary work that I do, and I continue to do that. And then the other thing I like to ask is complete this sentence. Before I die, I would like to fill, and then you fill in the blank. And I included this picture. It started with a woman in New Orleans, I believe, who lost a very good friend and was having trouble grieving. She just could not get along with her grief. And she found an abandoned building in New Orleans, painted the whole side of it black, and then put on it, "Before I die, I want to." And you can see how many times there are on this. It's actually spread to many other cities all over the United States, maybe even beyond, I'm not sure. But passersby just pick up a piece of chalk and fill in the blank. And I think you might be able to see, "Before I die, I want to own a boat. I want to see equality. I want to find love. I want to write a novel. I want to swim without holding my nose." I love that one. "I want to be published. I want to be the one that she believes I am, and I know I am." These are very moving to me, very moving. So the last chapter of the book is about losses. And I know that we've all lost people, loved ones, friends, pets, people who were very dear to us or near to us. But I wanted the losses to expand beyond that and just include any kind of loss whatsoever. It could be lives, love, money, jobs, jewelry, hair, health. It could be a limb, homes, and even the loss of virginity. I haven't had anyone write about that one yet, but I hope that someday someone will. I think it could be interesting. So one of the prompts from this chapter is some of us become attached to titles or positions that infer status of one kind or another, from homecoming queen to president, even assistant to the president, the title of Mrs., first place, record setter, team captain, etc. What title or position has meant the most to you? How or why did you lose it? And what was the impact? And it could actually be that it's a title or a position that you gave up that you didn't lose on your own. So those are the chapters of the book. These last few slides have to do with a section called "Rules Are Made to Be Broken." And one of the first questions I ask of a new class is that if they were to publish their memoir, what would the title of that memoir be? And just amazing titles that people come up with, so creative. The titles, everything about this class is just so creative, and the way they interact with each other. But I always say that my title would be "Rules Are Made to Be Broken," because I am a person who is actually, I guess I'm not a bad rule breaker, but I just break little rules, and I was not afraid of authority when I was young. And so I just have named my memoir "Rules Are Made to Be Broken." And I do have several rules that people think are rules that I believe are made to be broken when you're writing a memoir. And I'll take you to those. Let's see. Come on. All right. Oh, I forgot about this slide. I'm including this slide just to show you all the breadth and the variety of things that people write about. You might recognize Denise there in Egypt with her finger on top of the pyramid. There's some China that somebody was very reminiscent about. I think it's called Dutch apple, maybe. It's something that was very familiar in the 50s and 60s. There's a school that someone wrote about very fondly. A bottle tree in the corner of a porch that a woman wrote very amusingly about how she loved this bottle tree, but her husband did not even consider it any kind of art whatsoever. The Lassie not mailbox, but lunchbox. As we all took lunchboxes to school in elementary school. That was something that was an item, a favorite item. This short little squib of an obituary was what ran about a writer's husband who died very suddenly and tragically, and she had let someone else take on the job of writing the obituary that had always been a disappointment to her. And I had encouraged her to rewrite it the way she wished it had been then. And she wrote a beautiful piece about him, and it was much longer than just this little list of things and law organizations that he had belonged to. And this is the picture, I believe, of Patty over there on the left. Is that right, Patty? Is that you?
That's Patty, okay. And
Yeah,
the
that's
Oxford
Patty.
campus.
Okay.
Yes, it's me.
And I believe this went with a story that you wrote about the love affair you had with your career and how much you enjoyed and engaged with your undergraduate students.
Yes.
And then the picture on the far right for Memorial Day, I gave a prompt asking the writers to write about someone in their family who had served in the service and tell whatever they knew about them or were able to find out about them. That was a picture to go along with that. And then this little pink notebook in the bottom left is travels around with one of the current writers in the class. She calls it her enchantments book, and she keeps it in her car. And every day she writes several things that she has found enchanting. It may be something that she's seen driving around. It might be something she's heard on the radio. It could be something that she did, a lunch or an engagement with something. But I love that she calls it enchantments. It's just such a, I don't know, enchanting word. And it is not the least bit banal, even though some of the things that end up in there you might think were, but they mean something to her. Okay, now we can get to rules that are made to be broken. So truth. Everybody wants to know how honest they have to be in writing their memoir. Do they have to tell everything? Do they have to tell the absolute truth? And what I say is your memories are essentially a true story, but they may not be the same truth that somebody else would remember about the same event or the same time period. So it is, everybody has different memories, but these are your facts, your memories, your events. And even though your brother might disagree with you, he has a chance to write it the way he remembers it, but you should just write your truth and just let it go at that. I don't know if some of you will remember a New York Times media writer named David Carr, who he just had a column that ran every Monday for years, and then he died maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But before he died, he wrote a memoir called The Night of the Gun. And I don't know if any of you have read it, but it is a fascinating story because not only was he a New York Times columnist, he was a drug addict and an alcoholic and had had a very wild ride, even some of it while he was at the Times. But when he was starting to write his memoir, he decided to do it not just based on his memories, but more as a journalist. And he went back and interviewed people to get their perspective on certain events and things that had happened, not just because he might not have remembered all of them, but just because he wanted to know what the full picture of certain things might have been. And I hadn't heard of anybody using that reporting type device in doing that. He went to Best Buy or someplace and bought a tape recorder and a video camera and put it, just recorded all of it so that he would have their stories and his story. And it's an amazingly compelling book about his life, and he has since died. The other rule made to be broken, and this is, what about being nice? I might hurt someone's feelings if I say the truth about what really happened. And I pretty much end that conversation with this quote from Anne Lamott: "You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better." And I think that is really kind of good advice. I mean, nobody wants to be mean, and it depends on, obviously, the degree of hurting somebody. Many of you might have read the book Educated by Tara Westover. She certainly had a lot of unkind things to say about the family she grew up in. I think she did change some of the names of some of the siblings, but she told her truth, and it became a bestseller, and I think maybe a movie. I'm not sure about a movie, but it's also a very compelling book. So tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better. Love that. The other rules are made to be broken. I don't know about the rest of you, but in school growing up, and even when I began writing, you just were never to use the word I. Do not ever, ever start a sentence with the word I. And don't use the word I in your writing. I say that that is a rule to be broken because you are telling a story. It is about you. You should use the word I. You should use the word me. There are ways that you don't have to start every sentence with the word I, but you should. I try to encourage people to write as though they were sitting with a friend, having a cup of coffee or a drink or riding in a car, and just tell it in very natural conversational language. Sometimes people in a writing class think they need to try to be writerly and use big words and fancy words and long sentences and long paragraphs and go on and on and on. But that's not the way we talk. We talk as in conversation, and the stories that are written conversationally are the easiest ones to learn from. All right, this is another thing that's very interesting to me, that people think that a story, quote, story, must be written as a narrative. And most of our stories in the memoir class are written in narrative form, but we have broken out and tried a number of different ways of telling a story. You can tell a whole story in a series of Post-it notes. You can tell a story in postcards. You can write a letter of apology to someone. We've had amazing stories come from that. Writing a letter, dear so-and-so, and then a full apology of something that might have happened decades ago. Stories can be told in just photos. One woman wrote in photos, told the story of her husband, their marriage, their life, his becoming ill. He had cancer, and she documented that throughout until he died. That was a very compelling way of telling that story. One that we're going to be experimenting with coming up are doers' profiles. I don't know if you all remember the ad campaign that Doers Scotch ran decades ago, but they were very colorful and short and bright, upbeat, but you certainly learned something about the person featured in those ads. Someone has written one this week about each of her parents. And so I thought maybe I would give that as a prompt for the following week to see what we come up with. Patty also was taking another, I keep coming back to Patty because she's an inspiration. She was taking another class in which they were doing slams, the non-rhyming poetry form. And she offered us a template for how to get started with a slam. And the slams that the class did on their early childhood, I believe it was, were just absolutely amazing and extremely creative. And each one was totally different, even though they were working from the same template. A book that I also mentioned is a book called Dear Mr. You by the actress Mary Louise Parker. I don't always read celebrity memoirs, but she came out with this book, and each chapter is a letter to a man in her life about a period in her life. And they're not romantic stories. One is about her grandfather, one is a letter to her accountant, one is a letter to a taxi driver. And it's just a very interesting approach in writing a series of letters to different people. And it's also, I think she's a very clever writer, sometimes a little on the raunchy side, but she's a talented writer. One of the women who started in my class years ago was going to write her entire memoir based on kitchens that she had had in houses she'd lived in. I thought that was a very creative approach. So there are just many ways to do it. And I think I mentioned earlier the woman who tells her stories in charts and spreadsheets. She sent me a spreadsheet this morning about how she was like her parents and not like her parents. but it was just a chart. It was just chart, 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 chart. And I didn't think that it was anything the class would be able to glean anything from, because I couldn't fit it on a slide. And so she is busily rewriting right now so that she'll have something to share with the class tomorrow. So that, I have a couple of ending quotes. If you want a happy ending, that depends, of course, on where you stop your story. That's an Orson Welles quote. And the one that I really love, and for some of us, we might not have gotten out of the story fast enough, but if you ever find yourself in the wrong story, leave. And then my final word to you, which I think you saw in the proposal for this class, was the quote from Mary Carr about memoirs and memoir writing. And she says, "It's trashy, ghetto-ass, primitive. Anyone who's lived can write one." I just hope that maybe some of what I have said to you today and some of what I have shown you might inspire you to get going on your own if you have not already. Is anybody home?
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you very much.
I don't
This
see
is
you. I don't see. Okay,
fabulous
now I can see you.
ideas for thinking about
Now I
ways to
can
get
see.
started and things you might want to include that you don't necessarily see in the published type of memoirs.
Mhm. Very personal, and they should be very personal.
Okay, do people have questions for her? If you do, please use the raise hand feature. And I see Gretchen. Go ahead.
Susan, this is not a question, but it's a statement. Could you address the trust that you've seen in the classes and how there's unbelievable disclosure? I mean, I feel like I've disclosed more than what I would disclose to a close personal friend. And these, for the most part, are people I don't know, but do know deeply. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and I meant to bring that up earlier. Thank you, Patty, for reminding me of that, because I have an essay actually that one of the students wrote a couple of years ago, and I asked her if I could have permission to quote her from it, but I don't think I made a copy of it. Let me just look. No, I did not. But essentially what she said is that she, people come to a writing class for all kinds of reasons, or a memoir class, and she came just because she liked to write, but she couldn't do it without structure, without some starting place, and without a deadline. And she said once she got into this class, she had no intention of sharing any of the kinds of things that Patty's talking about. But after the first class, she ended writing about her mother's alcoholism. And just, people share so many, her mother's depression and alcoholism, her father's depression, her mother's alcoholism, and how safe it feels. And so many times people coming into this class are brand new. For instance, most of the people who are in the current class have been in the classes for several months, if not years. And they keep coming back because there's always something new to be addressed. It's new prompts. I just keep coming up with them. And, but so there is a certain trust and safety within this group that has been together. But we had a new person start with us last week who had never, I don't think she knew a single person in the class. And she wrote me afterwards saying she had no idea what it would be like to be in a room where people were in a room, I use the term loosely, but with people who are like-minded and so open. And when she saw what they were sharing, and her first story that she was sharing was about her brother and the difficulty that she'd had during her childhood because of his mental illness and how it had affected her parents. She didn't even know really that it was okay to write that story, but she did. And she was very engaged by the class. So it is just, and I can't say enough about the people in the class and what they bring to it. I feel like I am just kind of the facilitator. I offer the prompts, I do a little editing, I assemble the PowerPoints, I put the pictures together, I remind them about their deadlines or whatever. But they have created the space to share these stories. And they inspire each other. They learn from each other. They are just, and so many of them come in and say, I just never have written anything before. I don't think I can do this. Everybody can write. Even this, it's just amazing to me, the level of the writing of these classes. And it has been that way since the beginning. The people who have been taking it longer seem to have evolved into deeper writing, more meaningful. But even with the frivolous topics, we have somebody in our class now who writes a lot of funny things, but they are so creative and so well done. The Bottle Tree was one of her stories. And I just can't say enough about how the class has created that atmosphere. I prompt, but they take it and run with it.
And that's so neat to create that kind of atmosphere. That takes talent to set up that kind of trusting atmosphere. I think Gretchen has a hand up.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Just a wonderful talk, Susan, and clearly a wonderful class. So I can see why people like Patty and Denise rave about it. I mean, sharing is so important. And mostly, I guess, we do it with family and friends. But to be able to share with others and hear what they have to share, and moreover, to find the memories, right? You offer the prompts that help us find the memories that we can share. My question has to do a little bit with process. You know, give the prompt for the writing. The piece comes in. You said on Monday night you might do a little light editing, and then on Wednesday the class meets, and most people will read what they've written. So a couple of questions. Does everybody read the material ahead of time or only hear it read? And once that happens, once the material is read, is there discussion? Does discussion of some sort follow a reading? And do people comment on the telling of the story, the content of the story? How is that working?
Gretchen, I'm not sure I understand the first part of that, but are you talking about the class only when they're in class and the students are reading? That's the only time the rest of the class has ever seen that or heard it.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering if the writing was distributed ahead of
No,
time.
it's not, but
Okay.
there have been times when people have asked for a story or for several stories, when the writing has been extraordinary or the event or the occasion, whatever. So they have asked if I would distribute a copy. And of course I will if I have permission. If I don't have permission. Patty actually wrote something beautiful last week that I asked her if I could distribute to some friends of mine who were going through what I was going through. And there were people in the class who also had wanted that. And that happens, you know, occasionally that does happen. I, just as a minor point, I do encourage them to read their story out loud before they read it in class.
Oh, yes.
After they've written it, after I've looked at it, I encourage them to read it out loud, just because in the reading, you know, you may come to a difficult sentence and you pause and you can't quite get over that comma or whatever. And then you know you need to do something about that. If you have to stop and take a breath, then it's a signal that you might want to do something with that. So that is true with that. And then the other part you wanted.
Is there discussion then?
Oh gosh, oh my gosh, yeah.
I bet.
Absolutely. There are tears often.
Yeah.
Tears, and I am talking not just the reader, but all of us. And there is discussion, there's comment. I mean, obviously there's not time for a lot of discussion, and because there are, you know, 17 or 15 or 17 people in there, and we're limited to the time. We ran over by half an hour last week. And but there are comments, even if they're brief comments, they're supportive comments, and they're very, they might be insightful or they might be very specific. Not just good story, but something about it that they really liked. And I will often highlight a sentence after somebody's read, saying, I love that sentence. Will you read that again? It's so, you know, it's so lyrical, or it's such a great image or whatever.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Carrie, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It's a real eye opener in terms of this genre. I'm a member of the Authors Guild, and just within the last few months or a year, there's been a lot of interest in memoir as a genre. And someone has speculated, recently they formed a special group of memoir writing individuals within the Authors Guild, and it's apparently really gotten a lot of popularity. I think someone speculated that the interest in memoir writing has increased because, to some extent, of the technology that has emerged, such as the ability to, in essence, publish from your desktop.
Right.
That used to require a whole room of machinery in order to generate the same kind of copy you can today, just behind your screen. And I think also the little camera, we're taking little photographs of ourselves everywhere we go. All of this technology as a part of motivating this interest in the memoir and people turning inward in a way. Because of this technology. And I didn't know whether you had a comment on that, the spurring interest lately in this genre. Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Is your name Carrie? I can't see it exactly. It's kind of cut off. Is that right? Are you Carrie? I think that the technology has probably had a tremendous amount to do with it, because even though I have had some people in this class who still write in longhand on legal pads, and then they have to count the words individually, most of the people are pretty savvy on computers, and it's so much easier to put your thoughts down. It's so much faster. I mean, I think many of us who are adept on the computers can think as fast as we can type. And so and you don't have to sit there and just labor over pen and paper. So I think the technology, and you're right, I mean, you can literally publish a book without any second or third party involved. I have been asked by several students if I had recommendations for how they might publish. If they did want to assemble their stories, how would they organize them, and how would they find somebody to publish them? And I'm happy to help them with that. There is a printer publisher in Alpharetta that I've used for my little books, and it's very reasonably priced, and I have sent people there. I've had a couple of people in the memoir classes who have actually now got a book of the memoirs that they wanted to keep.
And you can share with them that there's an interest in a capability in self-publishing that
Right.
has really,
Self-publishing is huge. And some of the self-publishers end up on the bestseller list if they get the right social media attention and people propel them, out of the self-publishing genre. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yep. Okay, good.
Denise, I see you have your hand up. You're still mic'd. You're muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Denise.
Thank you, Susan. That was great. I came to the class really just wanting to do writing and to develop my writing, and have since evolved into thinking about doing a memoir or an autobiography. And one of the things I really like about it is that it's about exploration. So the prompts put you in a place where you can think about, how do I want to write about this? And then other people in the class, like Patty's slam poetry, which was really fun to do. One woman did a piece that was all like song titles, which was another way to think about, how do I want to do this? Song titles are great, but boy, are they time consuming, right? To figure out which title is what and how do I want to use it. But it is another way to think about how you want to develop your craft, and you can experiment with different forms. But there's also the emotional exploration that happens as you're writing. So you have to sort of think about, what are my feelings, but not just what are they, how much of them do I want to reveal?
Mhm.
Or what light do I want to put them in? Is there a humorous way to approach how I felt about that? Or do I want to go really in depth into sort of the hate, the hurtful
Mhm.
side of the feeling? So I think it does really engender this kind of trust about putting yourself out there. If you're thinking about publishing, or even thinking about just leaving something for people in your family, you have to think about, how much of me do I want to reveal? What kind of feelings do I want to put in that? Should I say I felt this way? I think that's particularly true about parents and children, because you don't really get to know your parents as an adult. You know them through your child's eyes, and even as you grow older, they're not revealed to you in ways that make them a separate person. And maybe that's how you want to leave what you're saying about yourself to your children, or maybe you don't. Maybe you want it to be like what you want them to put in your obituary, all the nice stuff. So I think it does encourage you to explore not just aspects about writing, but also about yourself and your emotional backbone, and how you want to relate that to other people. And certainly, if you're going to put it out into the world as a book, how you want to think about, how do I want people to feel about me when I say this about myself?
You do have to think about, I mean, really, you'd have to think about each piece as you go along. Who is the reader for this? What is my audience? Who do I think might be reading this? And there are plenty of people who are just writing these stories for themselves and don't have an audience in mind. But it is gratifying to them, for them to be able to get these things down.
Yes,
Other
Susan.
questions?
Susan, I'm a co-host, so I cannot raise my hand. This is Vernon Robbins speaking.
Hi.
Hi. And the last two discussions, especially, have prompted the question I want to ask. Would you please talk about writing memoir as therapy? And is there significant talk now about memoir as therapy? And do you think about the writing of memoir and the students the people in your class as experiencing therapy?
That is the essay that I wish that I had gotten the printout of, because that is exactly what she said in her piece, and that she wrote about. She never thought of a writing class as therapy, but it has become that. It has allowed her to write about things she never thought she would share with anybody. And I'm not a therapist. I'm not equipped to promote that or to pretend that I am, encouraging that. But I do know that therapists often encourage clients or patients to write things about what it is that is, whatever it is that's, the issue. So I think writing and therapy kind of go together. I did not intend for this to be an end result of it, but I know that there have been several times, Vernon, when people have said, I have never shared this story before.
Yeah.
And then there they are sharing it in a room full of people they don't really know and maybe not have ever seen in person. They have never shared that story before.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And so I guess, we've always been encouraged to write about things that are bothering us, or whether it was for a therapist or just for our own, whatever. but I had not intended that aspect to come through in this class. But I think there are a lot of people in the classes who have been in the classes over the years who have felt that. And there maybe are some who have dropped out because they didn't want it to be that, or they didn't want to participate in that, or they didn't want to hear that.
Mhm. Yeah, I
don't know.
think one of the interesting things is the relations of diaries to memoir. In other
Mhm,
words, many people, I think, write diaries,
mhm.
maybe for a therapeutic reason,
Right.
and they are encouraged to write diaries. And you possibly, we could think about your writing of memoir as kind of expanded and developed diary. That may be another way to think about your work, right?
I have given assignments that I have asked to begin Dear Diary
Oh,
on a particular topic. Start with Dear Diary.
yeah,
So yeah, that's true. That's
yeah.
true. Good thought. I mean, that's a very interesting. Oh, it's just so interesting to think about. I haven't ever, focused on that as a goal for this class, but it
Mhm.
has been accidental, is what I would say.
Well, I certainly think about step group therapy
Mhm.
groups, and as you know, there are many versions of them. Not only Alcoholics Anonymous, but other kinds of anonymous. And it strikes me that the kind of thing you're doing with the group writing their memoirs is very much kind of group memoir therapy.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very, I think it promises to be very healing, you know.
Well, I think they do play off each other sometimes. For the woman who wrote last week about her grandmothers, I just threw that out as a prompt for anybody else to pick up this week, and have gotten some amazing stories back and those lovely pictures.
Mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah. I
Denise
think
is one of them.
really, it seems to me the very special key that you're offering are these prompts where people, well, okay, what are they going to talk about? Well, they talk about something bad that happened last week, or they're searching for something to talk about. But you are bringing in prompts for essentially all of life.
Right.
The multiplicity of it is so rich and
And it's
so
never
individual.
over. It's never over. The prompts just keep coming. I mean, I'll just read something in the paper and think, it's something silly like Andy Murray. Somebody asked Andy Murray in an interview, the tennis player, what was his least favorite thing about himself? And he said his voice. It's like, whoa, your voice. So, here's a prompt. What is your least favorite thing about yourself? What's your favorite thing about yourself?
Yeah, well, I think you should be given an award for being a prompt collector or something.
Well, I think that's the journalist coming out in me, just, endless questions, questions, questions.
Well, so interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Patty, I see
I'm
your
going
hand
to,
up.
I'm also a co-host, and so I can't put my hand up. Vernon, help me out here.
So why don't we have Mary Lynn and then Patty, since Mary Lynn can't put her hand up.
Yeah, I can't put my hand. I mean, I've been kind of waving it around a little bit. I'm curious about whether you've had family members take a class together or friends take a class together, and how that's impacted how they feel about it. About writing some things, if it encourages some things but not others.
Interesting question. Yeah. And I had never thought about that until you asked this, but I have had a man and wife in a class, and he was being treated for cancer. He was getting chemo every week. And so it was a little harder for him. And she was very focused on a single topic, environmental issues. And so she was not writing very personally at a time when I thought there was a lot of personal stuff going on. He was writing more personally. And I had a fabulous couple, retired doctor, and they did not get in each other's way at all. I mean, they were very individual about their stories. They didn't overlap. It didn't seem like they had even talked to each other about what they were writing. And friends, yes. there are some people in the class now who have known each other for a while, some of them through an improv class, I think, that they took. And they became friends that way. Trying to think if there are any really long-term friends. I've had people in the class have recommended it while we were on Zoom to a friend of theirs from out of state. So I've had some people from New York and Chicago and California, South Carolina, whatever, because a friend had recommended it to them because they could do it on Zoom. I don't think there have ever been any conflicts about that. And actually, I've had people who were neighbors who didn't know they were neighbors until they met in class and we'll talk about what they were
That's
living.
lovely.
You know, they were very
That's
close neighbors.
That's yet another, that would be a good, yeah, two separate letters, you know, kind
Yes,
of going through.
yes.
Anyway, thank you. That was what I wanted to know. And
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's because I do know who are friends and then who have become friends because of the class. So it is kind of interesting. Yeah. Good question.
Thank you.
Okay, back to Patty.
Is there anybody else that wants to ask a question? Because you've already heard from me. Am I?
Well, I don't see any hands up
Okay.
at the moment, so go ahead.
If not, I wanted to note how important reading your work is. I was not an English major. I'm a professor of psychology. I have not read my work to anyone that I can think of. And I was terrified of that process at first. Getting back to Vernon's question, there is something quite therapeutic about reading your work to an audience of people. At this point, I do know everyone, but I didn't know them at first. And I find that, I know, Susan, you didn't talk a lot about that, but I think it's an important aspect of the course. It was for me, and it is for me.
I think that you all get to know each other in a different way, not just hearing the words. I mean, not just knowing what the topic is or what it is you're writing about, but the way you read and the inflections that you add to it and the emotion that comes through. And that, you know, Patty, that very often does come through. Or, you know, if somebody's laughing because you've written something funny. So I do think it's important for the readers to hear what the reactions are. We're not all totally muted during the reading. Sometimes I have to mute somebody who's moving around a lot and clashing papers or whatever, but yeah, I think that's a good point. It is important to read.
Mimi?
The other thing I will say, I mean, nobody has asked this question about where the prompts come from, but they just come from all over. As I said, it may be something that I've read in the paper, something I've been curious about. Just some of them are very ordinary questions, like if you were named for somebody, or, you know, can you talk about if you've had more than one marriage, can you talk about those? But a lot of them are just, you know, from life experiences and just being a reporter.
I think Mimi has her hand up next.
Hi, thank you for your work and this, and for the host of this session. I've appreciated it. I just recently retired, and I'm contemplating, I mean, I've done some steps to what I call sort of a memoir about my vocational life, my work journey. I'm not particularly interested in writing about my personal life history, but I feel like for several reasons I'm wanting to write about my work. And one of them is initially, now in the sort of retirement shift, for me, it feels like it would be nurturing and healing for me to make meaning of my work and to articulate that and to kind of explore that and to tell it in a rich way. So it would be sort of for me, but also My work path was kind of unique because it's been interdisciplinary and at kind of the early stages of a field of work that it feels like it would be a responsible thing to make a contribution in that way. Because I've just retired, I'm really not interested in taking a class or doing anything in a scheduled way.
I don't blame you.
But I wondered if is there particular guidance that would be unique to telling the work life story rather than the personal memoir story, or any sources, tips that you have or resources that would be useful to me?
Interesting. And I totally understand why you might not want to be jumping into something. You've got to have a period of time where you just do absolutely nothing. I don't know. I'm trying to think about the section on jobs and careers and the questions in that, but I'm not sure that I don't know how to say this, but I'm not sure they would go deep enough for what you're wanting to do. And I understand what you're saying is that you're doing something fairly new, and it would be responsible to try to relay your experience in developing and evolving that. I would have to think about that, actually.
Okay. It was actually really important to me to even just articulate that into this group. It's like kind of like for clarity, further clarity for me as I speak it, and also a commitment to that. So,
well, Mimi, what you might do is try to write down basically what you've just said to all of us and how you did articulate it, and just put that on a piece of paper and let it just sit. Put it under your pillow, do whatever. You don't have to try to act on it right away, but it will just help you try to think about it. And, you can just jot down notes as something occurs to you. I don't know.
Could she make up her own questions?
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely.
And sort of as though what's a question you want to answer, and just write down the question and let it sit, and then think of another one. What would you like a prompt? Write your own prompts in a way.
I've actually worked with some people on a coaching basis along sort of those lines. I mean, and it would take, it wouldn't take very long to do, but just to try to engage in enough conversation so that I could get them started on where they wanted to go with their story. And I haven't ever done just a strictly professional type approach. Most of them have been personal, but I have coached many people, not many, but several people through writing their memoirs and trying to figure out what they wanted to tell and what they didn't want to tell. But you could do that. And I think what Mary Lynn says, you could, if you think of a question, just write it down and just kind of put them in an envelope or a box or something until you've got enough post-retirement energy to start really thinking about it.
And read some biographies, or read some people who've written about their careers. I mean, just stand in the bookstore and look at them. Or
well, I have a specific recommendation for you, Mimi.
Okay.
I would Veronica O'Keeffe. I'll type it in the chat, has written a book, A Sense of Self, where she really presents case studies where she gave therapy and was dealing with really very mentally challenged people. And it's clearly a memoir of her life to really to tell her children, for one thing, what the value of her life has been when she was actually being taken away from spending more time with them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And A Sense of Self. I'll type it in the chat, Mimi, and you know how to get into the chat and see.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll do that for you. And so now I'll stop interrupting.
That's validating, because I'm the oldest of 6 children, and I'm single and not had a family and not lived the same kind of life of my 5 siblings. It's been more devoted to my work life, And it would be maybe for them to understand what the hell has she been doing?
Yeah. It strikes
I
me
love that idea.
it strikes me that's exactly what Veronica O'Keeffe was doing in that wonderful book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Add one suggestion, which would be something that was told to me by a writing coach, which is to sit down, make an outline of like specific points, turning points, or important events that happened along the way to sort of put your memory, and then think about what kind of perspective on your career you want to talk about, right? Is it from successful? Do you want to talk about failures and how they helped you be more successful, so that you can begin to think about it in concrete sections, and then you can fill in more of the outlines as you've thought about it.
Thank you. Yes, I've sort of organized it already around themes, and with index cards I've started. But thank you all. I'll let others step in. Hello, Angelica.
Yeah. I think the variety of perspectives that are coming up and the advice that everybody has is very helpful and unique. The next person who has a question is Jane.
Yes, thank you so much for this. It's been fascinating. Is there a way that I can access the recording to share with several members of my family who I think would find this extraordinarily useful?
Yes, it will be posted on the Emeritus College webpage under lunch colloquiums, and we have them identified by month. It may take a week or so before it gets edited and then posted, because Don O'Shea has to do something with the recordings to get them posted on the web. But you could, once it's posted, you could share the link with your relatives.
Right. And Susan, have you published a book of prompts?
I am in the process of
You're in the
publishing a
process.
book of prompts. I've got them all. I've got the prompts all neatened up and ready to go. I'm writing the introduction to the book now, which is a little bit harder, but I've been trying. Patty knows and Denise knows I talk about this all the time. I've got to get this book done, got to get this book done, but you know, daily life
I
gets
would
in the
like
way.
it's available.
I'll try to make sure you all know when it's finally out there. Thank you very much for that, Jane.
Thank you.
Angelica, I believe you have your hand up next. You're still muted.
You're muted.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Susan. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm in the process of writing a memoir because I did have a rather unusual childhood and adolescence. And what I find most helpful is that I'm a member of a 7-person writing group, and we meet regularly and we read to one another. And not everyone is writing a memoir, but everyone is writing. And there are many aspects that make this so useful. One is just a schedule that you want to try to have something to share. We meet only twice a month, but it certainly keeps me a little bit on the ball. But most importantly, reading out loud what you have written elicits the most useful, insightful comments, questions from the others in the group. It helps you see what you need to be more clear about. It helps you see what's really interesting, what people want to know more about. Also, as others and you, Susan, have mentioned, reading it aloud, it really helps your writing in terms of the cadence, and you notice unnecessary repetitions. And it's so short of taking Susan's class, which I would also like to do one day soon. Being in a small trusted group is just of enormous value. It has made a huge difference to me and really helped me in my progress.
Angelico, I love what you say about when you're reading it aloud and they ask questions, then you know what needs to be added. You know exactly what has had what's had the impact on them. I think that's a good point to bring out. They're just their comments. It's good feedback for you to have in what you've written.
It's very motivating, you know. I mean, fortunately, people in my group think this is interesting stuff, and so it keeps me. And yet, some other aspects of what I write about don't seem to be so interesting. It's a very important feedback from different minds, different mindsets, different experiences. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
This is actually another suggestion for Mimi. Like a lot of us, I've had a good deal of experience reviewing people's dossiers, right? You know, you get asked when they're going up for promotion. I get asked a lot, even in retirement, since I co-edited a journal on interdisciplinary studies. And so the dossiers come and I take that seriously. I'm sure we all do. Really spend time reviewing someone's work life, right? And then looking for a kind of pattern, a coherence, you know, a kind of narrative about what I'm looking at on the CV and other materials. And I usually will share that letter with the person that I've been writing about. And sometimes they write back and say, my God, I never thought to look at my work life history that way. You might try, what I'm suggesting, you might try writing up, you know, look at your CV, write as though you were reviewing somebody's work life, you know, looking for that coherence that amazingly can appear, and see what you see.
I often cheat and ask the person to send to me their memories of what they've done, often for a very important reason. I do not know what year they were in class with me, or what exactly they did, or what I wrote to them on a particular paper. So I guess I've given them a prompt. Susan, I didn't think I had, but I say, please send me a note reminding me of the classes you took and the things you did. And then that can help me as I'm trying to write those letters. I think Gretchen just has a special gift of looking at all the CVs and then finding the coherence in it.
Although, Vernon, I use your technique when people want reference letters, particularly for grants or other things. But I like Gretchen's perspective on the dossiers, because they come in every year to review.
You know, I was speculating on the publishing end of this, the publishing house in which one editor said to the other, there's a man out here with a memoir. His name is Marcel Proust, and it's remembrance of things past. And it's a large manuscript. Should we ask him to cut it down? But happily, he never cut that down. Nor in Swan's Way did he.
Write him and say, you got 400 words, Marcel.
Yeah, really.
Or cut down to 350, yes. Yeah.
You're right about that genre. The memoir genre is just exploding, though, and there's so many fascinating ones. If you just Google, 100 best memoirs, things come up, and it depends on what kind of people you're interested in, but it's amazing that you can make so much out of a life when people don't think there's much of a life there. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but a lot of people say, I haven't done anything interesting. I wasn't the president of a company. I didn't create anything. I'm not married. I'm not a mother. There's not much to tell. There is a ton of stuff to tell, always.
I have heard it said that when you're young, you read fiction, and when you're old, you read biographies. And it becomes much more interesting how people's lives, including your own. And that's something that possibly it's for our age group. I must say, I love biographies, and I love hearing how people got to where they are, either written by themselves or written by other people.
Yeah.
And I wonder if our age group fits in with, and I'm forgetting the name of the theorist, the needing to give back, the needing to contribute to future generations, that kind of need to share with others.
I have quite a few prompts along those lines, and exactly, you know, the best advice you've ever given, the best advice you've ever gotten, anybody you've mentored, because it is important. I mean, I think you do want to, we've all learned a lot of things and experienced a lot of things and figured out a lot of things, and you do want to share that.
I think it's generativity versus something else. I've forgotten my psych classes, obviously, that I can't put my hands on this well-known theory, but it does relate to aging and getting older and stuff. I have to leave because of another commitment, but I will make Vernon the host. So if you want to continue to ask questions, discuss things, feel free. But since I'm still teaching, I have other obligations.
And you have to stop the recording.
Yes.
And this is Gretchen, just another comment or two. Well, obviously, I think many of us are going to want this book, Susan, so do be sure and let us know when it's going to be available. Also, when the next, well, you can answer this now, maybe, when the next rendition of the course is going to open up and be available at OLLI. And is there you've mentioned you usually have 17, 18 people. Is there a class limit? Is there a size limit on the class?
Well, that pretty much is the limit, Gretchen, just because, you know, so that we have time for everybody to participate, to read, to make some comment. And the comments could go on a lot longer than they do, but we just have to keep it, you know, kind of down. I am planning to teach a class in November. I don't know whether it's been posted. I actually maybe have not told them that yet. I'm not sure about December because it's going to be kind of a short month with the holidays and all that, but this is one thing I haven't said. This is the most fun thing I've done in my life. And I don't know whether that comes across to you all or not, but I really am engaged in this and cannot imagine not doing it. You know, I'm definitely retired from the daily, you know, show up at the office kind of thing, but I do love this, and I do love helping people with their memoirs. I'm going to meet with a family this afternoon to help them with an obituary. And so I just can't imagine giving up this class. There was a time when I was doing 3. I was doing 2 at OLLI and 1 at Westminster. And it was just too many people, too many stories. I couldn't keep up with 50 people.
The fact you love it and those taking it love it certainly has come through. Isn't it wonderful that we can find these things to do in our retirement, right? That are even more wonderful than what we might have done sooner than that, and including coming to these talks, which we're now scheduling at 2 weeks intervals. I just wanted to mention that we've got a talk coming up November 1st, Monday, as we usually schedule these things, Monday, November 1st. And it's Melissa Carter from the law school. She runs the Barton Center for Child Advocacy. And it should be a great talk. There'll be a description in the newsletter that comes out on Wednesday.
So
Go ahead, Denise, would you like to say something?
yeah, I wanted to just throw out an interesting example of a memoir, which is Fiona Hill, There's Nothing for You Here. I think it's a fantastic book, and what she does in telling her story, she's actually trying to build a larger narrative about the economic impact on the US, the UK, and Russia, and the similarities in how they had to respond to basically recessions and then defunding of everything we know, and how that put us in the place where we are. So it's very interesting how she pulls from her life. And then because she was a Russia expert, she can talk about similar conditions in that country. And she ends the book with her recommendations about how we can recover from the place where we are now. So it's not just her life, it's her life in the context of world events. I've not read anything that tried to do this similarly, but I just think it's not only fascinating, but a really interesting ride.
Thank you, Denise. Anne has left now, and so I'm the host, and I think it is time that we want to thank you, Susan, for your absolutely amazing presentation. I think that your presentation, as has been mentioned, especially speaks to us at our age as we are reflecting back on our life and trying to reflect on the present and trying to figure out, you know, what kind of future we might have. And this has just been an amazing experience for us to have these prompts. And I myself have saved the prompts in screen, and maybe others have as well, and can find them with recording. So I want to thank you for that. And I'm now going to stop the recording, but that doesn't mean anyone needs to leave. We can still chat, but you're going to be more off the hook, Susan. You can see how your comments have brought forth all these suggestions, like the one that Denise just made here now. And we just want to thank you so much.
Well, I'd like to thank all of y'all for your interest, especially to Patty for inviting me to this, and for Denise for her continued support and showing up today, and her good comments and questions, and all of you all being engaged has meant a lot. And I really appreciate being here, and thank you for having me.